So on my YouTube community post, I've highlighted this tweet that Elon Musk recently made on X.com saying something special coming soon. Now, I went ahead and asked my audience, what do you guys think he's referring to? And someone commented saying the truck, obviously referring to the Cybertruck. And what I found very interesting is that when I went on googletrends.com and typed in Cybertruck and compared it to the search volume for the Ford F-150 Lightning, we see that the search volume for the Cybertruck is significantly greater than the search volume for the Ford F-150 Lightning, which just highlights the amount of demand that there is for the Cybertruck. And so if the news is an update for the Cybertruck, that could cause a significant catalyst event that could prop Tesla stock upwards again. However, this is honestly all speculation because at the end of the day, Elon Musk runs several companies. I mean, if you think about it, we have SpaceX, we have xai.com, we have x.com, formerly known as Twitter, and then of course we have Neuralink and Tesla. So it's not, easy to really pinpoint what he's suggesting. However, it'd be interesting if we did get an update on the Cybertruck and specifically get an update on the pricing. But with that said, I want to go ahead and hop into my laptop and kind of cover a couple of things that we want to pay attention to going forward when it comes to looking at what's happening in the overall economy and what are some things that we want to pay attention to with Tesla stock going forward. Alrighty, so we are officially in my laptop and we're looking at Tesla stock from a daily time frame. Now, before we cover some of the events that we absolutely want to parse through that are going to have an impact on the trajectory of Tesla stock, I want to go ahead and quickly recap some of the significant events that has recently occurred that had a huge impact on the price action for Tesla, starting off with the earnings that we had on the 19th after the close of the bell. So we saw Tesla beat its expectations on revenue. However, one of the things I often mention to the Push and Profit private group, and I believe I mentioned it publicly on a few YouTube videos, is that there's a lot of nuance when it comes to really gauging the earnings for a company, right? It's not just, oh, well, do they beat the expectations, right? There's also a few other things that you want to pay attention to, well, one of them being forward guidance, right? And so what did we have as far as the forward guidance for Tesla that day? Well, we had Elon Musk kind of give us a bad forward guidance telling us that, for Q3, production numbers may soften a bit and kind of stifle simply because there's going to be a revamp or an upgrade to a lot of their global facilities by upgrading and adding more gigapresses. Now, for a long-term investor, that's actually good news, right? Because obviously if a company is saying, hey, short term we may slow down in production, but this is because we're actually upgrading so that we could reach our goals of manufacturing more vehicles, well, that's good. But one of the things you have to understand is that Wall Street is very myopic and they look at things from a quarter to quarter basis. And so a lot of analysts and, institutions on Wall Street, they hear Elon Musk on a call saying, hey, numbers may kind of slow down, it's not going to be as expected. Well, Wall Street doesn't like that, right? Because again, they're putting their capital in and, expecting a return on their capital, but they're only looking at things quarter to quarter versus, someone who's investing long term, right? This is actually a blessing in disguise because you're trying to find a discrepancy between price and value. And although price is, selling off because of, bad forward guidance from the next quarter, right? This is actually good news because again, Elon Musk is saying, yeah, we're going to slow down on production numbers, but this is because we want to reach our goal of producing as many of EV vehicles and selling them, right? Again, then the next day we saw Tesla stock kind of bounce off, but we still continue to see Tesla stocks sell downwards. Now, I kind of talked about the reasoning behind this in, previous videos. I also went in depth with the Push and Profit private group. For example, we saw this big red candle for this day on the 27th. Let me go ahead and, kind of pan over to a 4-hour time frame just to show you. We saw a lot of selling pressure here. Now, there was bad news that came out for Tesla. However, one of the things I mentioned to the Push and Profit private group is that it wasn't just the bad press that came out with Tesla. It was and again, the bad press I'm referring to is the news that, Tesla kind of exaggerated on their EV range, right? So that was the bad press that came out that day. But I told the Push and Profit private group that Tesla didn't sell off this huge amount simply because of the bad press. And one of the things I mentioned is that if you actually pay attention to look at, maybe the NASDAQ index ETF QQQ, we see a huge selling off as well, right? We saw that as well in the SPY. We saw, the overall markets pretty much capitulate and panic on that day, and it wasn't simply because of some, press from Tesla, right? I went ahead and went into more details with the Push and Profit Private Group and explaining that this was a geopolitical issue with the Central Bank of Japan kind of mentioning a update on their monetary policies. Right now, I'm not going to go into too much depth in explaining that in this video, simply because one, I kind of saved that for the Push and Profit Private Group. Two, it's old news, and I don't want to make this video longer than it needs to. I want to keep it very short, sweet, and concise. And so, obviously, one of the things I focus on, if you guys follow this channel or if you're part of the Push and Profit Private Group, is that you want to look at multiple different data points, right? A lot of individuals on YouTube that talk about Tesla, they may only just refer to the headline of what media says, right? And the media gets things wrong often, right? Or you may have someone that only focuses on the charts and the technicals, or maybe someone that could actually understand the fundamentals, right? You don't have someone really on YouTube that covers multiple different data points and having a holistic approach, right? Because you have to pay attention to everything, because if you didn't know what was going on in Japan, then you wouldn't understand all this selling pressure, right? And so that's why it makes sense to have more data. It's always, I think anyone can argue that having more data is always going to be better than having less data. That's something that you can't really argue with. And so that's one of the things I try to focus on this channel, looking at several different data points. But, moving along, we saw Tesla stock pretty much rebound the next day as well. Now, I mentioned in the previous video that the reason we saw Tesla stock rebound this day was because of the fundamentals that we had from Ford. So what did we have from Ford? Well, we had Ford release their earnings. And again, there's a lot of nuance into earnings, right? You have to pay attention to everything going on. But we had Ford announce that they're actually losing more billions of dollars in their EV market, or in the EV sector, than they actually anticipated. And then along with that, they actually had to push forward their targets with their production numbers for their EV vehicles, right? They previously stated that they wanted to do 260,000 EV vehicles by the end of this year. Well, guess what? Now they're kind of looking at it and saying, oh, we kind of messed up and it may have to happen next year. So that wasn't good. And that's why when we take a look at Ford, we saw Ford pretty much sell off that day, right? Yeah, we saw Tesla stock rebound because this was confirmation that Tesla's still in the lead in the EV sector. And this is why you want to pay attention to the fundamentals of other companies as well, because it has a huge influence, especially if it's a company that is, often compared to Tesla. A lot of these legacy automakers that are entering into the EV space, you want to keep an eye on what they're doing, right? Now it leads us to where we're at now. So a couple of things that I want to talk about. So, obviously I've mentioned it multiple times on the channel that, I invest in Tesla in the long term. I have exposure to Tesla in my long-term portfolio. I mainly invest in index funds, but I also, I'm very boring, but I also do have some individual exposure to stocks like Tesla, right? I don't own too many individual stocks, but Tesla is one of them that I do hold for the long term. And I mentioned that I'm very bullish on Tesla in the long term, and I explained the reasoning behind it in a lot of videos. I'll go ahead and cover it a little bit in this video, but I also trade Tesla in the short term in a separate, trading account, separate brokerage account, because obviously trading and investing are two separate vehicles and you don't want to mix them up. I think one of the mistakes people often do is they don't understand if they're investing in something for the long term or if they're trading. And one of the best things you can do is just have two separate accounts so that you could obviously, make a difference and, or kind of, how can I say this, kind of separate the two objectives that you're trying to do, right? If I'm long-term on Tesla, well, I want to keep buying in my long-term portfolio. And if I want to trade Tesla, well, I'm going to need a separate account to do that, right? Now, one of the things I've been saying from the short term is I'm a little pessimistic or bearish on Tesla in the short term. Why? Well, when we look at the macroeconomic climate, things aren't looking too good. In other videos, I touched on the interest rates and how auto loan interest rates are really high. And, Tesla's doing a good job to stir up demand. In the previous video, I mentioned how Tesla is offering 84-month loans.
for their Tesla vehicles, and that's great, right? Because that shows that Tesla is proactive and trying to make sure that it's more affordable for individuals to afford EVs by offering these loans. The problem is these loans are bad because obviously, you shouldn't be paying a car payment for like 7+ years. That's honestly just ridiculous, and it kind of just shows you that the economy is not doing too well if we had to offer these loans. That's kind of a bearish signal that things are not really well right now, right? Now, what do we have coming forward as well? Well, next week, I really highlighted this with the Push and Profit private group. We have a, plethora of economic data with the job reports coming out. We're going to have initial jobless claims, which comes out very often. But then we have the ADP report. We're going to have the unemployment report. And, I'm not going to go into too much details on why we want to, parse through that data. But, one of the things I told the Push and Profit private group, right, just kind of a snippet so you guys understand, some of the conversations we have in the private group, is that you want to pay attention to the job data, especially right now, because we know that the Federal Reserve wants the labor market to kind of soften a bit so that they can continue their battle with inflation. Now, I'm not going to touch on that too much further. If you guys want to join the Push and Profit private group, make sure to check out the first link in the description below. There's actually a coupon code that expires in just a couple of days. If you just go to pushandprofit.com, hit get started, and type in coupon code CYBER, you'll have 30% off, right? And obviously cyber is because of the Cybertruck. But I'll have that link commented in the comment section below. I'll pin it, and I'll also keep it in the description so you guys don't miss out. But we have a lot of economic data that we're going to want to pay attention to, and that data is going to kind of shape where we are at in the current state of the economy. And that's important, right? Because things have been looking kind of bearish. Now, of course, I don't have a crystal ball, and things could actually look better than what they have been indicating for the past few reports. So that's something that we absolutely want to pay attention to. But looking at Tesla from a technical perspective, one of the things I've highlighted, let's go ahead and keep it like on a daily time frame real quick. So I always talk about the volume profile, which is shown right here on the right side of the chart, and that's different from your traditional volume by time. The volume profile shows us volume by price, right? And one of the things we see is that when there's a lot of volume by price relative to price, well, that means that there's obviously, a lot of activity between buying and selling, and that's when we see consolidation. That's why, we see supports and resistances formed when there's a lot of, volume relative to price. In comparison, when there's little volume to price, that's where we see the biggest moves up and down, because if there's a buying pressure while there's little volume to price, that's going to push the order books up. And then in the inverse, if there's selling pressure where there's very little volume to price, that's going to push the order books down. Very simple, right? We see that over here, very little volume to price. We see the selling pressure over here. Things are going down. We fall down. We have big red candles, right? And then in the inverse, when we're kind of bouncing up as well. But then when we look towards, where there's lots of volume by price, that's where we see consolidation and sideways movement. Now, I try to explain that as best as I can in these videos because it really maps out where we're currently at. We saw that Tesla, as we had the bad earnings or the forward guidance, right? We saw that it was in an area where there was little volume to price and there was selling pressure. And of course, with that selling pressure where there's little volume to price, we saw big candles going downwards. But we fell down to this shelf right around over here at the mid 200s where there's lots of volume by price where we're kind of holding up and consolidating. But one of the things I also mentioned from a technical aspect, and again, I don't put too much weight on technical analysis. It is one data point, but it's not the strongest one out there. But Tesla's held by a lot of retail traders and investors, and what do they primarily look at more often than not? Technical analysis. They pay attention to the charts. I often say that hedge funds, these institutions, they don't just look at the charts. They're mainly looking at fundamentals, alternative data. They're looking at economic data points. They're looking at monetary policy, fiscal policy. Hedge funds and institutions, they have more resources, and so they often have a copious amount of people doing research looking at what's going on in the economy versus retail investors like you and I, typically for the average person, they're just looking at the charts. And so that's why I put much more emphasis on the charts for Tesla for someone who's just or just on Tesla specifically, right? In comparison to other stocks that have more of an institutional holding, right? Tesla is mostly held by retail, right? So if they're focusing on the charts, well, it's going to have more of a significance, right? So we see that Tesla has been kind of getting rejected by this descending trend line. We see it happen a couple, just a few times, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? So we're seeing that Tesla's, from a technical perspective, is getting rejected. Now, one of the things I've highlighted, on this channel is that, okay, so we're seeing that Tesla's holding up over here, but one of the main things I want to see is if Tesla does fall down to this low $200 area, I want to see if it holds up around over here. Now, is it guaranteed that it's going to fall down to this area? No. Again, I don't have a crystal ball, and that's why I make sure that we want to stay data dependent and really follow up with what's going on. That's why, the data I told the Push and Profit private group coming, this week is important, because it's going to be huge data coming from, the job market, right? And so, we could obviously have data that pushes Tesla stock upwards, but more likely than not, we could possibly see Tesla stock continue falling down. And if it does fall down, we want to highlight this area around over here where it's the lower $200 levels, because again, that's where we see a lot of volume by price. Again, that's where we see supports in the past. That's where we see resistance. That's where we see the kind of the sideways movements. We don't see the big ups and downs. So when we hit this area, we want to go ahead and see, well, once Tesla, if it falls to this area, is it going to touch it and bounce upwards, or is it going to break below? Because if it breaks below, well, last time it broke below, we saw what happened over here, where we saw a lot of selling going on with Tesla. Of course, eventually we started bouncing up, but we want to pay attention to that area, right? That's where we see this dotted red line. That's the POC, which is the point of control, where again, just shows you that that's an area where there's a lot of volume relative to price. All right. Now, one of the things I mentioned in the beginning of this video is that Elon's kind of teasing us on Twitter saying something is coming. Now, he could be teasing us, right, for several different things. As I mentioned, he has several different companies. But if it is related to the Cybertruck, well, that could be good news, because typically once the production starts on a vehicle for Tesla, after a couple of weeks, we get the announcement of the price. Now, one of the main issues from, and then I'm going to kind of zoom in to a daily time frame from the earnings call, is that we didn't get much of an update on the Cybertruck. It was a little bit of a disappointment. A lot of individuals were kind of expecting us to get an update on the Cybertrucks, at least getting the price for it, and we didn't get that. Now, if we do get the price for the Cybertruck, and it does hold true that the base model could be priced at around $50,000, well, as I showed in the beginning of this video, there's a lot of demand, right, for the Cybertruck. There's a lot of search volume, and if it's at an affordable price, well, that could be a significant catalyst event that could push Tesla stock upwards, right, and back into this area where there's little volume to price, and we could see, those big movements up. Again, we're going to want to see if we break above this descending trend line, because of course we could get rejected and continue falling down, or we could break above it and continue going forward, right? So that's definitely a significant catalyst event, but again, it's us speculating. And so one of the data points that we really want to kind of pay attention to, that we know for certain is coming, is the job data that I told the Push and Profit private group about, that I went more deeper on. But with that said, from a long-term investor, I want to go ahead and see what happens with Tesla going forward, because if we do fall down to that low $200 area, as I mentioned earlier, well, that can be, an opportunity to scoop up more shares, and of course, dollar cost average. Now, everyone's going to have their own view on investing long-term. Some people dollar cost average by investing an equal amount every month. Some individuals invest a lump sum, right? There's, research papers that debate both views, and one of the things I try to mention is that you should never copy what I do or what anyone else does. You should always just do whatever you see value in. And for me, when it comes to the indexes, index funds, yeah, I invest equally every month. I set aside some capital, but for some of these individual stocks that I hold, like Tesla, I don't do that. I kind of tend to wait for those opportunities where we see a huge amount of selling and then that confirmation of an uptrend, and that's when I add or deploy more capital into it. Again, that's just my perspective on it. You guys should not follow what I do and only follow whatever you see value in. Now, from the perspective of a short-term trader, if we do see, this data come in bad, well, that could, push us to continue selling off more. Now, the data that may come off in the future, in this coming week, is a little bit tricky. Actually, you know what? I won't go on into details with that. I kind of want to leave that as just an exclusive thing for the Push and Profit private group on, the intricacies on how we want to really look into these reports. But to keep it very simple, if we have bad data, well, I may continue to short Tesla in my short-term trading account and obviously take advantage of the fluctuation of the price and obviously exploit the opportunity of it falling down. Now, I know oftentimes when people say exploit, it has a negative connotation, but really, even if you're investing long-term, the term exploit is kind of still relative, because if you're investing in a company in long term, you're trying to find, again, that discrepancy between price and value. Wall Street thinks Tesla's not as valuable as it should be because they're looking at quarter to quarter, but if you're a long-term investor, you could exploit that opportunity. So again, even if you're trading or investing, your goal is to exploit and take advantage of the opportunities that the market presents. But with that being said, I want to keep this video. I already made it longer than it needs to be. I want to know your thoughts on Tesla, both on the short term or the long term. Are you guys investing in Tesla? Are you guys trading Tesla? What are your views? What do you guys think about the Cybertruck? I'm always interested in hearing what you guys have to say. But with that said, make sure to check out the links in the description below. Take advantage of that coupon code for the Push and Profit private group. And I'll see you guys on this next video right over here. Take care, guys.